was the head of the design department and very much a hands-on manager. So, he spent long days and nights down at the shipyard overseeing what was going on. There's a story about him taking his wife down there one time and saying, "There go my boys, Nellie," and showing her, again, with this wonderful sense of pride, how Titanic was coming along. So, he's an integral part of the ship from start to finish, and that's why he was so important when things started to go wrong.
A unique way of studying is waiting for you at VU. One where you learn in interactive classes, not lectures, and complete one subject at a time in 4-week blocks. An innovative way of learning where you attend 3-hour classes 3 days a week, allowing for that perfect work-life study balance. Experience the flexibility and focus of our unique VU block model for yourself. Apply today. Victoria University. Uniquely you.
Despite all the fanfare surrounding Titanic's launch, the ship that slides into the Lagan on May the 31st, 1911 is far from complete. It'll be almost another year before the ship of dreams is ready for her passengers. In the meantime, it's her elder sister, Olympic, that will carry White Star's fortunes across the Atlantic. Just 2 weeks after Titanic is launched in Belfast, Olympic sets off on her maiden voyage to New York. Meanwhile, Titanic is towed to a special fitting-out berth to begin her transformation into a floating luxury hotel.
It gets launched and it's just empty at that point. So it goes down to what's called the fitting out wharf, where all the special stuff happens. All the craftsmen get on board and it turns into a luxury liner. And that's where the engines and the boilers are put in and the funnels put on top. And then the final stage is just a brief spell in a dry dock just to finish off the hull of the ship, to paint it, final bits of electrics and plumbing and that sort of thing.
Once completed, Titanic is pretty much Olympic 2.0, taking everything that works from her sister ship and then improving it with small adjustments. She's very much the pro version of the new model, or as she's known at the time, Olympic Perfected. Strictly speaking, she's also a record breaker, the biggest ship ever manufactured. But only because minor changes to her layout and interiors add extra weight compared to Olympic, to the tune of about 0.5%. Tim Moulton is the author of 101 Things You Thought You Knew About the Titanic, but didn't.
Titanic is more or less a carbon copy of Olympic. The only difference visually, really, is that on the Olympic's maiden voyage, some of the first-class passengers complained about spray from the bowways washing over the promenade deck, and so they therefore decided to close the promenade deck, which gives Titanic that slightly more modern look. Internally, her area was the same. The reason why they could say she had a higher tonnage than her identical twin sister ship is because they rearranged the accommodation on the ship, and tonnage was actually calculated by accommodation. So she was said to be the biggest ship in the world, but actually she was the same as Olympic. And almost all photographs of Titanic being built and, her staterooms coming together, almost all of them are actually the Olympic, because Harland and Wolff completely documented the building of Olympic all the way. They then didn't need to document the building of Titanic very much at all.
In the years following the Titanic disaster, the similarity between the two ships will lead to some interesting theories. Even today, some people believe that it's Olympic and not Titanic that ended up at the bottom of the ocean.
I love conspiracy theories. I think they're great. They say more about us than about the Titanic. There were 2 British journalists who wrote a book about it, The Riddle of the Titanic. And the second one was called The Ship That Never Sank, because those books sold so well. Although they have to be looked upon as fairy tales, they sold so well that so many people read them, and some people even believe in this. One of those stories is that because of accidents that had happened with the Olympic, she was so damaged that they couldn't repair her, and therefore it was decided they would be swapped, Olympic and Titanic, and that the Olympic, now called the Titanic, was to be sunk in the mid-Atlantic It's a very far-fetching theory, very interesting.
Far-fetched it may be, but for those who were familiar with both ships, the similarity between them must have been uncanny. More than 2 decades after the Titanic disaster, Olympic was still ferrying passengers across the Atlantic.
It must have been always very weird, right, if you happened to be a survivor of the Titanic to see the Olympic, right? Because, it looked almost identical to the Titanic.
All of Titanic's most iconic design features are shared with her sister ship, including the magnificent grand staircase. Immortalized in James Cameron's 1997 movie, the elegant 7-story staircase runs right through the first-class section of the ship, providing access for White Star's richest passengers to their luxurious dining and smoking rooms. In fact, Titanic actually has 2 almost identical grand staircases, one near the bow of the ship and another towards the stern. It's the former, which stretches all the way down to the dining saloon on D-deck, that gets most of the attention, because this staircase is more than just a means to an end. It's a destination in itself. Veronica Hincke is the author of The Last Night on the Titanic, unsinkable drinking, dining, and style.
This staircase adds to the theater of what the Titanic truly was. It was a place for people to go and to meet their friends or make new friends. As you were dressing up in your cabin, you'd be thinking about, how am I going to look on the grand staircase tonight? And it was just a really special gathering place. And we see that in the details throughout the staircase. The cherub statues, the scrolling stair rail, and the beautiful ornate design of it, and then very subtle but yet thoughtful floor design where you see a square pattern repeated throughout. And again, discrete windows that aren't just like a porthole, a round porthole that you'd expect to see on a ship, but they are arched windows that let the light in. Those were the things that made the Titanic special.
And then there are the dining facilities themselves. Not just the 3 giant saloons for first, second, and third class, each with their own all-inclusive set menu. But for the richer passengers, 2 stylish cafes. The airy Palm Court and Veranda Cafe on the promenade deck at the top of the ship. And 1 floor below on B-deck, the French-inspired Café Parisien, with its wicker furniture and white trellises covered in ivy. But the ship's boldest culinary innovation, nestled behind the aft grand staircase on B-deck, is the intimate a la carte restaurant. For Titanic's well-heeled elite, paying extra to order off the menu is seen as a mark of luxury.
The Titanic was a ship of firsts in many ways, and one of them was the a la carte restaurant. It was a much smaller area, but it still had a lot of the same types of features as the first class dining saloon. A little more floral. This is a more feminine room, pink throughout. Lamps with little shades around them, mirrors on the walls to give the same type of Versailles type of impression, to make that French influence throughout.
All in all, the vibe for the first-class passengers at least is that of a 5-star hotel, one that just happens to be floating on the ocean, somewhere between the Ritz in London and the Waldorf Astoria in New York.
You could actually sail on the Titanic, and not until you reached harbor you'd realize you'd been on a ship, because the interiors were so great. They had spent an enormous amount of money to make it look like a palace.
In the years following the disaster, questions will be raised about whether Harland and Wolff may have scrimped on some aspects of Titanic's build. In fact, thanks to the company's long-standing relationship with White Star, if anything, they're encouraged to overspend.
What they did was that Harland and Wolff were paid on a cost-plus basis, which meant that instead of White Star giving them a budget, really, what they did was they just said, look, show us your books, open books, and show us what you spent, and then, your profit will be 5% more than what you spent. So actually, in a way, Harland and Wolff was incentivized that the more money they spent on the ship, the more money they would make. There was no incentive to cut corners.
Every element of Titanic's interior has been debated in minute detail. Every high-end supplier carefully vetted to ensure their products reach the highest possible standards. The candelabras that adorn the grand staircase come from Perry & Co. Bond Street. Chinaware from Royal Crown Denby. As one senior Harland & Wolff designer will put it later, we spent 2 hours discussing carpet for the first-class cabins and 15 minutes discussing lifeboats.
Taking business payments with Westpac FPOS Air is as easy as, doing anything on your phone. As easy as checking your emails, or messaging your nan, or watching your favorite cat video. Classic. There's no extra hardware needed. The app turns your phone into an FPOS terminal and your funds are settled the same day. Take payments easily. Search Westpac FPOS Air to learn more. Eligibility criteria, T's and C's, fees and charges apply. Westpac business transaction account required. Available on compatible mobile devices and tablets only.
This episode is brought to you by Children's Panadol. Help relieve your child's pain and fever this winter season with Australia's go-to pain relief brand, Children's Panadol. It can start to reduce fever in 15 minutes. Plus, you'll receive a $10 kids gift card with your purchase. Visit your local pharmacy or visit panadolchildrenspromo.com.au to find out more. T's and C's apply. Always read the label and follow the directions for use. Incorrect use could be harmful.
Here, the fitting out berth. At last, Titanic is ready to set sail, joining her elder sister Olympic on the transatlantic passenger route. But first, she must pass a series of sea trials to check that everything is working as it should be.